Hi everyone, welcome back to part 3 of the interaction tutorial. Today we're going to be going over the interaction character and finishing that out so you can actually walk up to the parent interact and have that button press interact event happen. Now inside the character we're going to be setting up 4 functions. The first one is going to check if we should update these interactions at all. That's just going to find out if there's anything around us we could currently interact with, and if not, we don't need to do anything else. If we do have interactions around us, we want to make sure we're getting the best one, which in our case is just going to be whatever the player is looking at from their camera point of view. That's going to be called get best interaction. It's just going to loop through all the interactions that we could possibly interact with, we're close enough to, and find out which one is the best. From that point, we're going to call another function, our final function, called set highlight interaction. And that's just going to highlight the interaction and select it so that when we do press the interact key, that's the one that gets called. Now I did say 4 functions and those are just 3. The 4th one we're creating is just really going to be a container. That way we can call a single function and all 3 functions inside of there get called alongside it. So let's go ahead and open up the interaction character. Inside here we have our interact event, but not much else. We have these 2 functions, add interaction and remove interaction, and our interaction list. Now for this first iteration of these functions I'm going to put together, we're going to base it off of the tick event. And the tick event gets called every single frame. We don't necessarily need to do this, and afterward I'm going to show you how to kind of move this over to a timer. But the tick is just a very quick way to make something loop and give us some quick feedback and make sure everything's working well. To add the tick event, all you have to do is right-click in your event graph. You're going to search for tick and add that in. I'm going to go ahead and comment everything real quick. And we're just going to call this our update. Now, I already talked about those 4 functions we want to add in. Let's go ahead and add in the first one, which will be our container function. Go ahead and hit the little plus sign, and we're going to call this one update interactions. And this is going to contain the other 3 functions inside of here. I'm going to go ahead and comment. And we can call this one update interactions for now. Back in our event graph, we can go ahead and drag this out and drop it right next to our event tick and hook it up. That means every single frame we're going to be passing through here and calling this function. But if we don't have any interactions in our list at this time, we don't necessarily need to update anything else. So the first thing we want to do here is just check to see if we should be updating at all. This is going to be our function called should update. Should update interactions. This is going to output a Boolean for us. It's going to go through and check a few things, and whatever comes out, either true or false, is going to determine whether we should be updating our interaction list or not. So that's under outputs. We're just going to click new output. It's going to give us a return node and Boolean by default. And we can say should update. We can compile save. And back in our update interactions, this container function, we can drag and drop out this should update. Here we can drag out from the should update output and just add a branch in. So we can determine, true, false, where do we want to go, which direction. What should we do after that point? But inside this function, we need to just determine what are the rules in which we should be able to interact or update those interactions around us. And the very first thing you can add in is just the interaction list to make sure we have any around us at all. So if I hold Control, I can drag out and get a quick get, and we just need to find out if there's anything in it. And a quick way to do it is to look at the length. The length of it, if it's more than 0, it has something in it, and we should update. We can say greater. And we want to make sure just to do greater, but not equal. If we do that, it'll always update. Now we could hook this straight up here and be done, but anything else in here that you want to stop these interactions from happening or allow them, we should add in as well. This is good enough for most people if you just want to make sure that we have something in there to check. But I also can do things like bring out our character movement and check to see if the character is currently jumping or falling. If they are currently in the air doing one of those things, we might not want them to be able to interact with stuff. It would be a little bit strange if they're jumping around and picking things up at the same time, especially if you do want to play specific animations for pickup. So to find out if we are falling, we just drag out a line and say is falling. This brings out a Boolean. But it is if we are falling, if we are in the air. So we also have to drag out and type in not, which will get the opposite of what we have coming out here. So if we are in the air, it'll return true. We want it to return false, which we'll do it here. Now to make sure that both of these are true, we need to drag out and use the AND node. And this will only return true if both of these coming in are true. We can go ahead and comment. And normally, again, you'd want to put something in here to describe what is going on. But I'll leave it blank for now. Now our next function is going to be the get best interaction. This one's a little bit complex, and this is where our decision making for what we should be selecting gets done. Let's go ahead and add it in. Get best interaction. Now in this function, we're going to be looping through this list that we have and just kind of looking at each individual actor to see which one we are currently looking at. We do this with a for each loop. So we can drag out and type for each, and this will pop in. We can hook up the execute here, and what will happen is it will loop through the entire list through this node. It'll keep going back and forth through this node until all the entries are gone, or gone through at least, and then it'll come out of the completed here. So what we need to do is just check to see if our camera is currently looking at a specific actor. And what it'll do is keep track of these numbers, how closely you're looking at each one, and compare them at the end to, number one, make sure that we get the closest one we're looking at, but two, to make sure that we are looking at least generally at it. If we have an interaction in here that it is the best out of all of them, but we're still not really looking at it at all, we shouldn't use it either. There needs to be some sort of threshold. Now we could just drag out and say get actor location. And this would return the actor location in the world. However, this does cause some issues. If we go back to our scene here, and our character would walk up to this object here, and they would look at the center part. It would make sense. This is where the UI should pop up. We're looking at it. But let's say it was an elevator, and there was a control panel on the side here. We can set this up to be a part of that, but we wouldn't look there to activate it. We would still have to look at the root right at the middle. This causes an issue, especially because we do want to be able to move these things around, change where the trigger location is, change where the static mesh is, even what the static mesh looks like. If you have a specific elevator mesh, we need to be able to tell them where the interaction point should be. Now, a good way to do that is actually where the UI is located, because the UI should be what they really see when they're going to be interacting. So instead of using actor location, which will always be at the root here, let's use the UI location. We're just going to get the world location for that. So if I jump back into my character, we can delete this out. And what we need to do, because this is a parent interaction reference, if this isn't for some reason, this for loop is just pushing out actors, make sure that this is correct, BP interaction, and just drag out another for each. It should come out as that interaction parent reference, but at times I've had it output actor, which doesn't allow you to get any of the functions or the components from it. But mine is good right now. And we can go ahead and we can say get UI interaction UI. And we're going to get the component itself and then get the world location. This will be the location directly in the world and not based on anything in the actor. There's no local offset that we're looking at or anything like that. It's just pure world location. And now what we need to do is get a direction from our camera to this world location. We're going to kind of create a direction, like from point A to point B, so that we can compare that against where our camera's forward direction is. It's going to draw a line from this point to our UI, wherever the UI is on this actor. And then it's going to compare it against the forward direction. So the line from point A to point B here is going to be compared to this red line going straight ahead. If they're close enough, meaning if he's looking enough at this actor, that's when it will activate. Now the way we do that is actually through subtraction. Vector math, what we can do is take two vectors, subtract them, and then normalize them. The subtraction is going to kind of get that that direction for us, and normalizing will make sure that everything is between -1 and 1, which is that pure direction. So let's go ahead and grab our follow camera, and we can drag and drop it out, and we can get world location as well. We're doing world location here for both of these because they're components, and that's what you have to do with scene components. We're not selecting the actor, we're selecting each component individually. Again, we can subtract. We're going to choose vector and vector. And this will then output that kind of directional vector, and we can normalize it. But now we have the direction, and what we need to do is compare it against the camera's forward direction. So if we drag out another follow camera, or even we could just kind of drag this down, we need to get forward vector. This will output a forward vector. We don't need to normalize it. It'll already be normalized. And we can do the dot product between the two. So we can say dot product. And what the dot product will do for us is it's going to figure out if these two vectors are equal, or if they're perpendicular, or if they're the exact opposite. And it's going to output a float based on that fact from -1 to 1. 1 being that they're the exact same, -1 being the opposite, 0 being perpendicular. And it's going to do it in a way that we can kind of create this cone, depending on what we compare this value against. And if anything is within that cone, these numbers that it outputs, we can allow that interaction to happen. So what we're going to do is create a local variable for that. It's going to be a float, so we can store these float values coming out of here. And we can rename this one to dots. These are going to be all the dots that we go through in our list. So we do need to hit this little button up here and make it an array, this array list. And if we drag this out, we can add each one of these as it comes through to this local variable. So we can drag out and say add, and we're going to hook it up to each of the dots, and then the loop body. So this local variable, it doesn't get saved after we leave this function. It only lives in this function at this point in time, and it gets reset every time we recall it. That means that we go through, populate our list, and then on complete we're going to check the list for the best. Next time we come through and check again, nothing is saved in here. It gets all added again, and everything is updated and checked again. So we can drag out dots down here as well, and what we want to do is use an array function that Unreal has built in called max of float array. What it will do is get the maximum, the biggest value in this array, and output it for us with the index of that. That way we can get that value, and the index will be the same as the index in our list here, so we can choose which one is the best. Now the one thing we do want to check before we get the best is if it passes our threshold. This is the idea that even if we have something that is like, if we have 3 values in our dots, but they're all negative, we don't want to pick that because we're not looking at it. We want it to be at least close enough. And that's where that threshold comes in. It needs to be bigger than a specific number that we choose. That will narrow down our field of view that we can use to interact with something. So what we want to do is say greater than or equal, and we need to choose a number for our threshold. So we can drag out a line, promote to variable, so we can keep track of this. And we're going to call this one interact threshold. And we're going to go ahead, drag out a line, and say branch. We can hook this up to complete because this is what we're going to call right after we're done with our list check. Now, if it were true, what we're going to do is check to see if this value is already selected, and if not, we're going to select it as our current interaction we will be interacting with. That means that we can just pop up its UI, and when the character activates that interaction event back in the event graph, that's the one we're going to be choosing to interact with. If we're false, though, we don't pass our threshold, that means the rest of them aren't going to be true either. Because this is the max, this is the closest one that we can have. None of the other ones are going to work for us either, and that means that we should turn off everything. We're going to set our interactions to be null again, to be empty, so that we can't interact with anything, and turn off all the UI for our previous interactions, if any exist. But this is a good place to create a function for it. So let's go ahead and add in a new function called setBestInteraction. And we need to bring in a new input. We're going to say new. We're going to do interaction parent. We're going to reference. We call this interaction. File save. And this will be passed through, and we can check to make sure that everything should be updated, and then move on. The other thing we're going to do here is if this is passed as empty, that means that we can set our best interaction to null, to nothing, and deactivate any of our previous ones. Back in our get best interaction, let's drag this out, and we're going to create one for up top. And here we're going to be getting the element from our list. We can copy and paste based on this index. So we can drag out and say get, and this is where our index comes in. It's going to be the same place from our interactions list that it is in our dots list. And we can hook this right up. I'll move this a little bit back. We need a little bit of room because what we're going to do here is copy and paste this function and set this to false. But we're not going to hook anything up to it. This is going to pass that null or empty. Now from here we can grab everything and comment. We can just say get best interaction, and that'll be fine for now. Now, something to note before we move on, and we're still right here, is that this follow camera, if we don't have access to move our camera around, let's say we're a top-down game or a side-scroller game or anything like that, we don't really want to use the camera as our way to find out if we should interact with something. The easiest way to kind of fix that is to use the character's forward vector instead. So instead of using the camera, all we would have to do is delete both of these out, say get actor location for our location, and that's just going to take the center of the character and do the same thing. And we're going to get actor forward vector, and we'll use the forward vector of our character instead. So same kind of principle. It's a little bit less control though. A lot of games that do this end up being a little difficult to select things, especially third-person games where if you walk over an item or you're right on top of it, when you try and back up, if it doesn't allow you to kind of strafe or walk backwards, the character turns whenever you move forward. It gets hard to line up. You kind of have to move away from it and then move back to it, hoping that you can kind of line that character up again. That's kind of why I opt for using the camera. You have a lot more control over it, especially in a third-person game. This also works for first-person, but again, if you don't have camera control, it doesn't really work for you. So that forward vector for that character is what you'd want to use, as well as that character location instead of the camera. Let's go ahead and let's finish out the set best interaction. Now, inside here, we can go ahead and let's create a local variable right away, just because I know this is going to be a little bit messy otherwise. And we can rename this to new interaction. Now, that's the first thing we can check on, is we can drag out a line and say is valid. And we get two options. This one is a little bit easier for us right now. It's the question mark. The other one brings out a Boolean, but we're looking to kind of branch our setup to go one way or the other, so this works best. And if it is valid or not valid, we can change what we do based on that. Now the next thing we want to do, if it is valid, if we are passing something, we want to update it, we need to make sure that this new interaction we have here is not the same as what we are currently looking at. If we're currently looking at it and we're still looking after this updates again, it'll get the same one because it's the best one to interact with still. But we don't need to update anything. It's already been chosen. Everything is shown from the UI standpoint. We don't need to re-show it. It's already there. So what we can do is say not equal, and we're going to drag out another line, and we're going to promote to variable. And this is going to be our variable that keeps track of what we have currently selected for our object, for our interaction. So instead of object here, we're going to do this interaction parent class. We can change variable type, that's fine. And let's rename this to Selected Interaction. Compile, save. And what we can do is drop in a branch here. Now at this point, if we hit false, if they are the same, we don't need to do anything because we have already highlighted them. But let's say we have not. And all we need to do is just set our selected interaction to this new one and then highlight it. So what we can do is drag out with a Alt held down, and we can do a quick set. And we're going to move this back here because we don't quite want to set it right away. I'm going to move this up to my list. And what we want to do is see if this is valid. So I'm control drag out to get a get, and we're going to convert to validated. This is going to tell us whether or not it has something in it already. Now the first time we walk up to an object, there'll be nothing in it, and it'll skip this process completely. But let's say we're standing next to two objects, and we look from one to the other. We need to turn off the previous one before we turn on the new one, just so we can keep track of it, and we don't lose out on any of that information. Because once we set this to our new one, we won't have access to turn off the old one. So we can drag out, and we're going to do the toggle UI. And this is the function within our class that we made before, and we're going to set it to be invisible, so false here. Now after that's done, we can control drag out our new interaction that we're setting our selected to and set it up. With this not valid, if there is nothing selected already, we can go ahead and just skip that entirely and drag some reroute nodes and put it right to our set. Now once we do that, we still have to toggle the UI on, so let's toggle UI, and this one we are going to check, and it's going to be visible. So again, we'll go through, make sure that we're not the same, and then we're going to turn off a previous one if we have any, and turn on the new one. We keep track of it in that selected interaction, so that when we do interact, that's what we'll call for the variable. Grab all this and move it back just a little bit. Now, what we want to do is also add in if this is not valid. If this is not valid, all we want to do is turn off everything. So everything that we've done here. So I can grab both of these, copy and paste, and hook this up to the not valid. And all this is going to do is tell our selected interaction to turn off its UI, and then we can copy and paste this set node, and we're going to set our selected to nothing. And this is important just because we want to make sure that if we do press the interact key, that there's nothing in here, because it'll still interact with it then, even if we've turned off the UI and done all that stuff. So this is all nulled out, and everything should be turned off. We can go ahead, grab everything, and then comment. We can say set best interaction, And again, you should add in a little bit more details about what you're doing here. But for now, for this tutorial purposes, I'll leave it as that. Now, get best interaction. Again, we're using it here to do that. But what we also want to do is go back to our update interactions and add in both of these, both the get best and the set best. And the set best here is going to turn off everything if we shouldn't update at all. So let's say you're in the middle of a couple interactions you could do, and we press the jump key. We want to turn that all off so you can't interact with them. The get best will go through the whole thing and see if you should interact or not, just through that list and checking everything that we just set up. Save and back up. And here we have our update. And now if we control drag out this selected interaction, we can right click on it, say convert to validated. This just makes sure that we actually have an actual selection interaction that we can do. And this is where we drag out and say interact. Now for the character that we have down here, we just want to reference ourself. And this self reference will be the actual instance in the world. So this actor itself and not any other actor will get passed in so that we know this is the person interacting with us. If we're a pickup, it knows that's the person who's going to be picking it up, and so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and just comment real quick. And we can say something like interact. Compile, save, and we should be good. Now before we jump in, the last thing that we did forget to do is change this interact threshold. We created this, but we forgot to, or I forgot to, update its value. So at 0, it's going to be a lot easier to look and have this interaction happen. What we can do is just bump this closer and closer to 1. Now it kind of depends on how close you want it to be. The higher to 1, the more you're going to have to look kind of directly at it. So we can do something like 0.8 to start. That should give us a decent sized cone to kind of view this object in. Now if I press play and I walk up to it, it does look like it works. And if I start to look away more and more, it does go away. But it is quite a large cone right now. From what I can tell, we might want to bump it up a little bit more. We go back to our character, that threshold, let's bump it to 0.9. And now we can make sure that we're only really looking at it and not at something else. Now, if I hit the E key to interact, it'll pop up in the upper left as the interacted. Now, we should have all of our functions and all of our list of variables to just make the interactions happen. There's a few other things we could add in there and probably will need to in the future videos. Things like when we interact, to have that kept as a variable as well as our current interaction. That's useful for things like things being picked up and put down. You have something that's physically already interacted with, not just selected. We will also do things like have the ability to drop objects and things like that. So we'll need a couple other variables and functions for that. But for now, the character does work as intended. You can interact with objects, and in our interaction parent, you can start subclassing this. And with the subclasses, you can go kind of crazy. Each subclass or child class can be something completely different, like an elevator, a quick button, a light switch, crafting table, anything that just kind of needs that basic, okay, walk up and press a button. We now have a very easy system just to create. And we modify just what happens. We don't have to worry about the rest of this setup anymore. But the one thing I do want to show, if anyone wants to stick around for it, is just to showcase how you would set this up inside of a timer instead of this tick event. And before I do that, I can also drop all of these into an interaction category. I'm just going to do this real fast. And we just do that to keep everything organized and easier on you when you go back through everything. Or if you're working with other people, when you hand it off to them, it makes it much easier to comment and to organize. But let's say we don't need to update this every tick. And truth be told, we really don't. We can get away with calling this much, much less frequently than we currently do. Because this is every single frame, we do get a very nice, precise, immediate reaction, but most people aren't going to notice if it's every 0.1 seconds, let's say. That's still a ton of frames that we don't have to call this on. And we'll keep in this should update, so again, even if we do call it on that timer, it might not even go anywhere from here. Back in our update, what we can do is leave this in for now, but I'm going to disconnect these. If you don't know, disconnecting is just the Alt key and you click on the lines. You also can, a nice shortcut is if you hold Control, you can actually move these lines around, which is very useful. But Alt-click will delete them. Now, we want this timer to be running only when we're within range of interactions or not. So the best place that we can update this is actually in our add and remove interactions. Both of these functions, we have the option to kind of pause or resume a timer based on if we have anything in these lists at all. We also kind of want to start the timer at the beginning. That way we don't have to start it in one of these. It's just kind of nice to get it out of the way. We can do a begin play. You could put it in the other functions, but this is a little bit cleaner, I think. I'll comment it. And we're going to call this one begin play for now. And we want to set timer by function name. And we do this so that we can put in our function name, this update interactions. And every time it loops, it will call this function and everything gets called inside of that. And that's kind of why I have everything within a single function. It makes things easier just calling one instead of having to put out more all in a row somewhere else. So within the function name, we're just going to say update interactions. Make sure it is spelled the same. I don't have any spaces in here, so I believe make sure you don't have any spaces, or if you do, add that in. We're going to drag out a time to promote it to a variable, just so we have some control over it. We can call this one interaction update rate. And again, let's drag it right into our interaction category. And we can set this to be at like 0.1. In fact, let's actually bump it up to like 0.5, like every half second, just so I can show you how that would affect something. We do want to make sure it's looping. We can compile, save. And out here we have this return value. And this is a handle that gets created when you set up this timer that can either pause or stop or resume this timer just by using it as a variable. So we can drag out and say promote to variable, and we're going to call this one the interaction timer. We can drop this in here. And the first thing we want to do is pause it. So let's pause. So we create it and we pause it, and we're just going to resume and pause again every time we add or remove interactions and we determine whether we should pause or not. Back in our add interactions, all we have to do is get the length. So we can get our current length. This returns the index, so we don't want to use that. We want to get the length itself. And we're going to do something similar to that should update, where we get if it's greater than 0. Now, because we're adding something to it, it really shouldn't ever return false here. But just in case it does, we're going to add in both functions here and in the remove. We can do the same thing. We can drag out our interaction timer, and we're going to say unpause if it's true. and pause if it's false. And we're going to copy all of this to the remove and hook this up to our interaction list. Again, if we're still greater than 0, it should unpause it. If not, pause it. And now we should be able to find out if this is working or not. What I'm going to do is actually bump this up higher to about a second. We can save, and let's see if it works. When I press play and I walk into it, it doesn't pop up right away, but yeah, it looks like it does after. And if I look far away from it, it doesn't go away right away, and it doesn't come back right away, but it does happen within like a second of time. So this isn't terribly bad, but in a game this would be awful. You'd be running around trying to grab it, and someone might be chasing you, and you will be in big trouble. The other thing you'll notice is that when I run away, it doesn't actually disappear on us like it should. So that is something we need to fix as well. Now, the easiest way when we remove our interactions and we go to pause our timer to say that we have nothing in here is to just set this best interaction here. We know that it's empty, and we can go ahead and call this and end that right away. We don't even have to wait for a timer or anything like that. We just do it. So now we see it's here. When we leave, it immediately disappears. It doesn't even have to wait. So that's the remove interaction. Same thing with the add. If we somehow get to that point, we should do the same thing. We'll set best interaction. We know it's empty. We can do that. Now, that 1 second is way too long. What we can do is drop this down to even something like 0.1 of a second, and it will run way, way faster. Something like this isn't necessarily perfect, but is really close. Like, you would have difficult time telling when you actually look at it and when you don't. Again, you can keep lowering this more and more, or if you're like really, really concerned, keep it within that tick function. If this is something that is super important and it has to be on that frame, definitely just do it this way. But looping through based on a timer is also very easy to do, and this is how you would do it here. So depending on which one you pick, you can either keep this one, delete it, or delete this one. You only want one or the other. Or you could set it up so that there's a Boolean checking to see which one it should be using or not, based on your character at a certain point in time or something like that. But that does it for this interaction tutorial. In part 4, we're going to first go over how to create a better looking UI, and then we're going to start creating subclasses. Thanks for sticking around. See you next time.